Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful, I guess summer is here, officially here. We're gonna continue this week's free school. We're gonna continue from last week in talking about our upcoming music symposium on Duke Ellington, Charles Mingus, Sun Ra, and Bootsy Collins. But before we talk about those preparations, we're gonna first go back to something that Doc had said last week, which is that music today, in this particular moment, in this country, and in the crisis, is perhaps the most concrete site of ideological struggle, one of the most concrete sites. So I think Doc is going to start the discussion talking both about the crisis today, the times we're living in, Asia, the importance of Asia, and also talk a little bit about the film that just came out, Sinners by Ryan Coogler, and how it sets up the importance of our upcoming music symposium. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Dr. Montero.
Well, I want to defer to Dr. Sambarto. He brought food and soup to my house and helped to get me better. And a lot of good conversation. So, well, good morning to you all. I just want to say that while we're not always talking about political or geopolitical economic issues, they're always assumed and part of our discussions because we've talked about these matters so much over the past few years. And, I know a lot of what the information we get it from bourgeois newspapers, but also from podcasts. And I think, and I was saying, to the poor above, every podcast is not the same. And sometimes a podcaster gets old and tired, and you've heard it so much that there's nothing new he could tell you. For instance, even though Alexander Mercurius is a very informed, very smart man and commits himself to conveying a lot of information that you wouldn't get otherwise, there are limits because of his own worldview. And then, of course, people like Scott Ritter, they've just exhausted themselves and on an emotional roller coaster these days. And they're, you get the same people over and over and over again. I don't care whether you're listening to Judge Napolitano or anything. And, I've begun to realize that the podcasts with the largest number of likes or views or whatever are the ones that are less significant. It's a very ironic thing. But what I want to say, all that to say, that podcasts are all over the place, and I shared with a lot of people. And I think if we could, some of these maybe we could share on the avant-garde or the free school media. The Adam Tooze, and he represents something similar to Jeffrey Sachs, but I think in his theoretical understanding is a little beyond or above Jeffrey Sachs. But and maybe we could share it around to other people. Adam Tooze is, in November, he spoke in Switzerland and on Asia, but a lot on China. And he, like Jeffrey Sachs, talks about Chinese growth, economic and social growth, but more how Asia, and especially Northeast Asia, had conquered poverty. And he mentions a lot about Korea, mainly South Korea. I just think it's very useful for us it sets a greater context. And I guess what I'm saying is, in spite of Western propaganda, we just cannot avoid China. What at one point, I think, did you listen to it? Yeah. One point he says that what took 2 centuries for the West to achieve, China did it in 25 years, you know, and it's just so spectacular and unbelievable. And that with this rate of growth and development, China alters the whole global situation. There is no two ways about it. Does that mean that China does not face crises? Of course they do. But I just recommend that this is the context, even for Trump's tariff wars and economic wars against China, which Trump and the United States can't win. It's almost, at this point, pathetic to listen to Trump and his Secretary of the Treasury. Just pathetic men. And the longer Trump is in the office, the more pathetic and bizarre he appears. I think that's fair to say. And if he thought that he, in the name of the United States, could rearrange the world's political and economic order in a matter of months by using the U.S. economy, the U.S. dollar, its trade position. I mean, first of all, to even have that thought suggests that you're cognitively compromised. It's ridiculous. But China, with this powerful industrial base, with the technological capacity, with the numbers of scientists and engineers that can build 1,000-mile railroads in a matter of a few months. You know, I mean, well, no one can explain how this is done or how it was done, not even the Chinese. So I know that that does not address the cultural questions that China must deal with this massive urbanization. I mean, that in itself is enough to tip the, how could you say, the earth on its axis. All these people move from the countryside into, you know, it's mind-boggling. And it is, and the West and the Western elites are either in a state of complete shock or with a person like Adam Tooze or Jeffrey Sachs saying, this is a fact, we must adapt to it, etc. And as such, the Tooze and the Jeffrey Sachs are against war with Russia and with China. So to come to terms with China is also to come to terms with peace, war and peace. So I just recommend that. Tooze has his own podcast and so on. The other thing is, in this respect, as we go forward to the music conference next week, and Michelle is calling musicians and producers and everybody that will pick up the phone when she dies. And there's a very favorable response. Musicians, not so much, and we'll get to that. It's almost what Sun Ra predicted. But one of the things, one person who was very favorable to the music symposium said that he wanted to know why the free school is not more critical of Trump, which requires, I think, not that we go into it in a lot of detail now, but that we restate what our position on Trump has been for 3 years. And first of all, we said that this moment was, in Gramscian terms, an interregnum. That whether Trump was elected or whether Kamala Harris was elected, it would not alter the basic fact that the nation is in something of an interregnum, a transition. We said that pregnant in this interregnum were the possibilities of pre-revolution, pre-Civil War, or the collapse of society. We always pointed to the fact of the American people, 70% saying that the political and economic systems had to be changed, 15% saying that they had to be overthrown and a whole new system brought into being, 25% according to many polls saying that they would not be opposed to the use of violence to change the situation. We pointed to the fact that in all of the discourses about the crisis and who people would vote for, one thing that was not a part of the discourse was the call for race war. Although the ruling elite assiduously sought to find evidences of all-right militia groups calling for this. I don't think they could find it, even among the January 6th people. It was more like white people saying, we want to lynch some white people who are in high positions. They, in fact, had a, what do you call a thing?
Hangman's noose?
A hangman noose and all that. And they were going after the former vice president. And when they attacked the Congress, they didn't say, where's the Congressional Black Caucus? They said, where's Nancy Pelosi? So it was kind of what you could call white on white rather than black on white. But the evidence of racial antagonism intensifying is not there. It is not there in spite of the ruling class narrative. We also pointed to the fact that the two candidates were congealing and crystallized, the forces supporting them were crystallizing on class terms. In other words, Trump got the majority of working people. And it was a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious coalition of working people that they had gone against the union leaders, they'd gone against the Democratic Party, which most of them had been loyal to for many decades. So, and then of course, when the first assassination of Trump, when Ross Douthat said in the article, very important article, that Trump's survival showed that he was a Hegelian man of destiny, something like Napoleon, and the Hegelian trope. And we said, no, history comes in twos, and Trump is I was going to say a lunatic, but a farcical figure. He's kind of played that role, So for those who want to say that any objective or scientific analysis is itself betrayal of the progressive cause, they need to go back and rethink. And as a guy said on WURD, you need to check yourself. There's something wrong with your thinking, not with the thinking of the free school. And if people want to know what we're about, don't just repeat what you heard, come here and hang with us or talk to various of us. Or if you don't want to do that, everything that we do and say has been archived. And we do not take any responsibility for Trump, but we did say that the Biden administration had to be rejected, even if they were prepared to make minor reforms in their war and genocide policies. They could not be allowed to be reelected. And if Trump won in states like Michigan and others, and probably Pennsylvania and in other places, we have to at least put a part of it on the struggle for peace and against support for Israel. And it remains so. So we were right. Our methodology was right. Our political principles were right, and we still stand by them. Now, a lot of people see the free school as a strange cohort of individuals. How did this all come together? Now, that's a very difficult question to answer, which I'm still trying to answer. But we're something like the Sun Ra Orchestra, very unusual group of people who share a common destiny and a common purpose. I sometimes think of the free school in quantum mechanical terms or in relativity theory, where our time space are locked together. What is the free school and what is the free school doing? Well, that's a hard thing to define. The free school is doing many, many things at the same time, almost simultaneously, which boggles my mind and makes it so that I'm working overtime. And so what is the free school? The free school is many things, a group of people with a great purpose, a cause, and great ideas. A group of people who think about the world in big terms, not in small terms. So if you are about winning the Congress back in 2026, like they say, we're not against you, but that's not the essence of what we do, Or if you want to get on the Bernie Sanders AOC train, go ahead, but that's not what we do. Or if, apropos, people like Al Sharpton, alleged civil rights leader, alleged black, and you want to boycott Target because of equity, diversity, and inclusion, well, go ahead and do that. You understand? That's not what we're doing. Now, if you want to talk about fusing and coalition of efforts, then we can talk. But we're not bowing down to a trade union leader or trade union staff. We're not interested in that because it would require that we sacrifice too much of who we are and what we're trying to become. And I would say, as we've always said, that the battle will be over ideas. Who wins the ideological struggle wins the future. And by the way, it's always been that way. Protests without ideas and ideology, nothing wrong with protests, but just aimless protest it leads nowhere. And many of the people who you will see marching today, a couple of months, you'll never see them again. And that's the history of that. I know there's so many people who were laying down. I mean, just in the recent time, over Black Lives Matter, laying down in the street, getting arrested, about 8, 10 years ago. And then I run into these same people. What you doing these days? Oh, I was in the mental hospital for a little while. Now I'm gardening. So wow, man, no more commitment, no more activism, no more, So what was all the sound and fury about? And is that the way we are marching? It is not. We're trying to make a deeper and more long-term and enduring contribution to the people, and so on. So I think at times it's necessary that we reintroduce ourselves. And I would say to anybody that's listening, and what our introduction today might not fit our situation a week from today, because the free school is a dynamic, living collective of human beings guided by a single purpose, which is not putting free school and ourselves first, but putting humanity first. And if others can make that claim, and I don't think they can because they don't use even the language that we use. But if they can make that claim, join us then. I used to get a little bit upset with these imitations of free school, but now I've come to peace with, I've come to terms with it. It's imitation not as a positive thing, but imitation in order to replace the strong hand. I think that those who wanted to do that now realize that we're not hardly going anywhere. And in fact, as they become weaker, we become stronger as a collective and as individuals. There's one other thing I want to, so we just have to know who we are. And I think we do. I cannot understand how the free school does everything it does. I know there are Black folk, a small group of them, well, Tony has abandoned Black people, he's going to the Asians. To which I answer, if you love Black people, and frankly, if you love Africa, you need to be pro-China. You understand what I'm saying? You need to be a part of a global movement. Yeah. This idea of, I'm down with Lieutenant Tagore. In Burkina Faso. He's a very charismatic dude. I mean, he really looks like he's a Hollywood casting thing with his uniform and pistols and shit. And that's beautiful. But if you're down with Burkina Faso, which is a very small country, which would be very difficult to stand up alone against Western imperialism, you need to be down with China. Because it is the Africa-China alliance that could make Africa stronger and more able to resist neocolonialism. So this idea of Black exclusivity, which is a suicidal, self-defeating project. It is always the mantra of reactionary cultural nationalism. So if people want to know, and there are people in the, I wouldn't call it the gossip. I'm into gossip, but with members of free school. But But if you want to know, it's a lot of people want to know, well, what is Tony doing? Where's Tony at? You know, and I say, come on and ask me. You know where I'm at. Like one brother went up on URD, brother that I know who remain nameless for the time being, went up on there, on the air. So this brother that he was down with Trump, and now when I see him in Whole Foods, I've run away so I don't have to see him. All I had to say was, you thought you was running from, I'm running from you. Because I don't want to see you. It's just, all this drama. Oh, I can't stand to be in his presence. He has betrayed the blackness leadership. But yeah, I'm against the black. I never made a secret of this. Ever since Glenn Ford introduced the concept, I have been one of the strongest advocates of it. And me and the black, y'all might know, me and the blackness leadership class, we have a very difficult relationship here in Philly. You know what I'm saying? Where, they be coming at me and I'm coming at them. They took a job from me and I kept, so I'm not down with the black. And I made that clear. I say it all the time. I'm not down with the blackness leadership class. I'm not down with the mayor of Philadelphia. I'm not down with the president of city council. I'm not down with none of y'all. You know what I'm saying? I can't do no better than that. This is my history. We've been, sometimes it's a love-hate thing. Sometimes we have a good relationship, and other times, according to how they come, then we have to, do whatever we have to do. But anyway, but that's just it. I just wanted to say, because anything we say is they want to spin it, that's anti-black. Why? Because I don't agree with y'all? Is you are the definition of blackness? Yeah, is that what you're saying? And if I don't agree with your logic, your positions, your corruption, then I'm anti-black? Well, first of all, let's compare our resumes in struggle. What I've done and what y'all have done. Let's do that. Let's start there. And one would be one page, the other would be, well, maybe a book. You understand what I'm saying? So there ain't no equivalence. So you don't bring the blackness leadership class individually and collectively. Don't bring any moral authority to the table that would trump anything I do. Believe me. And so when it comes to that question, in the dynamics and complexities of the black struggle, you understand, be it the Afrocentrists, be it the blackness leadership class, the neoliberal blacks, and so on and so forth, be assured and feel confident that our hand is stronger than theirs right now and will be stronger in the future. In relationship to the black masses, I can almost guarantee it. You see what I'm saying? Now, I want to talk about the movie Sinners because I went to see it yesterday. And it does overlap with the music conference and issues that we have been discussing in our planning. Ryan Coogler is a mediocre filmmaker, very mediocre. I was almost embarrassed at how mediocre the film was. He does not know how to tell the story cinematically that he's trying to tell. we could differ with the narrative that he's trying to present, but at least be able to present it. You know, have you seen it yet, Sam? Okay. At least be able to present it with some maturity, some sophistication. He can't do it. The acting, except for Delroy, what's his name? What's Delroy's last name? The older actor. The acting is so poor. Michael Jordan? Was it Michael B. Jordan? I guess that's what he is. Come on, man. All right, you got muscles. I mean, that's the big thing. Everybody got to be cut these days. You can't star in a movie unless you chopped up. The thing, I'll tell you, this muscle bound thing that got all out of hand. But you know, that's the result of people reading too many comic books. You know, superhero, everybody, you know, I'm buff. You know, they even introduced that nonsense into boxing. And you know, boxers need very fluid muscle. You get too muscle bound, you can't even throw a punch. And then the muscles wear you out by the third round. But so I looked good when I was introduced, but then after that, but anyway, I'm just making a joke out of it. Oh, the man can't act. Have you ever heard of method acting? And I want to know what acting school you went to begin with. Very poor, or maybe poor direction, or a combination of both. But it's a narrative about the blues. That's what he's trying to tell, a story about the blues. To his credit, I'll just say this, he does not try, there's no talk of hip hop and rap as a continuation of rap, of the blues. But there's no discussion of jazz. There's no discussion of rhythm and blues. But it's this attempt to establish the Miri Baraka thesis that Black folk are blues people. Now, that book was published in 1964. It remains valuable, but the thesis was more plausible, could be more plausibly argued in 1964 than today. And I'll try to explain that. But that Black music comes from this seed of this tree called the blues. Now, this is very problematic because there is a lot of Black music, especially the composers that we will explore in the music conference. You listen to so much of it, that's not the blues. There is the blues, but there's music that is not the blues. So to say that there is one source, and you know, usually they will say the chords of the blues are played on the Black keys, the minor keys, the minor chords are the dominant ones. That is true for the blues. And the blues is a great music, but it is not the finality. But then there was music that preceded the blues. It was called the sorrow songs. What people do not understand is that the sacred music of Black people persists even to this day. In a lot of ways, it was preserved in historically Black colleges. If you get you can go in the Tuskegee University Choir and you listen to them sing updated, let's say for the 1920s and 30s, the sorrow songs. These were songs that were not written down, but they were passed on orally. And Fisk University and other Black colleges, all of whom had choirs. Let me just parenthetically, today everything is the marching band, and everybody is doing a Broadway production. And I asked myself, the young women who, pretty and sexy and all, but wait a minute, are y'all getting a degree in Las Vegas showgirls? Because that's what it is. And they're good in terms of marching bands, and because I was in marching bands, so I was in the drum line, so I like all of that. But let's keep it 100. Back in the days, it was the choirs, the Fisk Jubilee Choir, the Tuskegee University Choir, the Lincoln University Choir, not a marching band. And they were preserving and archiving narratives, the sorrow songs. And I think this is, Michelle, this is something we might have to draw to the people's attention.
Yeah.
On the other side, many of the sorrow songs became the hymns of the Black church. Our hymns, like the Black Baptist, Black whatever, our hymns are very different. If you go to an Episcopal church, they have a hymnal, but it's the hymns of the Episcopal church. Now in Baptist church, we would have because we didn't have our own hymnals necessarily, we would have them like the Baptist hymnal from all of the Baptists. We would buy them from the white Baptists, or they would give us their hand-me-downs. But then there were anthems that were particularly special to the Black church, And then a part of this in the early part of the 20th century became what we today call gospel music. Gospel music is more secular forms of the sacred music. When gospel first appeared, it was passionately opposed by many in the church. That's why you get take a Dinah Washington. She and her mother fell out over her wanting to sing secular music and not stay within the sacred music. Or you take Mahalia Jackson. The only time, and she says this, that she would sing sacred music is because, as she put it, Duke asked me.
Yeah.
But she would not sing outside of the church. This music was held to be so sacred. And at the same time, in certain churches, you couldn't go in there with certain kinds of gospel music. It was felt to be disrespectful, and you were bringing the streets into the church. In some ways, the sorrow songs, as I've described them, persist. But gospel is more popular. When you listen to Aretha in that famous album, Amazing Grace, Aretha came up under people like Claire Ward, the Caravans out of Chicago, and her own father, who was a minister. And they stuck pretty closely to the old time singing. James Cleveland, who conducted that concert. So she knew and she respected the music of the church. And even though Aretha could go out and sing secular music, when she came into the church, it was a whole different Aretha. But she's singing a whole different kind of music. But then the blues comes essentially with Reconstruction, the end of slavery. See, a lot of people get it wrong. They say we are blues, but what kind of people were we before the blues? You see what I'm saying? The blues as a music comes after slavery. The music during slavery, and Du Bois is right about this, were the sorrow songs. All of this, and the film kind of gestures towards it. There's an African root of Black music, but it is transformed in the transatlantic slave trade. There were not sorrow songs in Africa. There were work songs, there were melodies, there were other kinds of songs, but there were not sorrow songs. Sorrow songs are different. They speak and communicate to the enslaved in a way that communication was not needed in Africa. You know, it grew out of a necessity. The sorrow songs persisted and persist up till today. So they're over 400 years old. It is foundational to American music. The blues are a more recent development because they are a secular music. And the instrumentation is different.
Yes.
There are more instruments in the blues, including the guitar. The Africans had the banjo, but the guitar was a new instrument for them. That's in the movie too, kind of. I think it's a gesture towards that. But the struggle in the movie is over whether or not the blues will survive. Now, was there ever that question? I don't think so. See, the whole trope of the vampires sucking the blood of Black people to get their music, you know, to get their art. But then the one blues guy, what's his name, Sammy Moore, he escapes to Chicago. Remember, the two twin brothers come from Chicago to set up a juke joint, place where Black people could go and drink and party and listen to blues. They were gangsters, you understand? And they came down there with money. They were, in fact, it's said in the movie that they were connected to the Al Capone crime family, you know, the Italian gangsters. And so it is Sammy Moore escaping to Chicago that, quote, saves the blues. Well, you know, it's, I have to say, they had to spice the movie up with a lot of violence at one point with the vampires, and then with their little sexual activity. Because people gonna be falling asleep. And I know I fell asleep in part. And then, so you have to have all of this to keep people's interest. This big kind of Broadway dance scene, where they have the blues up till today of punk rock. They had a Black punk rocker, I don't know where they got him from. But then, no jazz, of course. They don't understand even the blues. But I was happy with the film that it was so poorly done. I was really glad because that meant that it's going to be a blip. And by next week, you ain't going to hear no more about it. $100 million. However, it is not the film itself, it is everything that follows. For example, an army of Black academics that don't have anything better to do or are now hopping on. Oh, we can use this film as a teaching tool in the junior high school. Well, what you going to do with the sexual parts? You know what I'm saying? Suppose somebody's mother say, look, I don't want my child seeing that. But anyway, so now you got a whole curriculum for African American studies courses in the fall. Okay. So they'll show, lazy academics or just poorly educated who will use this to talk about everything from whatever you want to talk about, Trump to whatever you want to talk about, and how we as this African people. Now I want to explain that trope, and it is a trope.
Right.
See, the we as African people is a signifier for we as an exclusive people. We as a people alone and without allies. We are people who cannot trust any other people. That's what that we as African people, or you get another phrase, I am a global African. What the fuck that mean? These are fictions. These are linguistic inventions, tropes that serve to pacify Black people and say, in effect, which is not new for cultural nationalists, we have no way out. King was wrong. Du Bois was wrong. Garvey was right. Africa for the Africans, European for the Europeans, Asia for the Asiatics. Sound good, don't it? But it's bullshit. Because the same person that said that also said that that Britain rules Africa and I am best able to serve Britain. So a man of conflicted and contradictory positions who contributed very little to the Black struggle, intellectually, ideologically, or otherwise, suddenly becomes the hero of this global African exclusivity, or even the very concept that the African American people are African, and thus, until we understand it, and quote, this is Malefe Asante, recenter ourselves in Africa. What does that mean? If I'm poor in North Philly, center myself in that. Well, okay, we mean culturally recenter yourself. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means do like I do, rename, get a different name. That means wear African clothing or supposedly African clothing.
Right.
But what about the substance of my being? And so on and so you see the complication. So this movie, although I don't think Coogler was necessarily saying that, because it's hard to know what he is saying, because what he says in a large measure is determined by who financed the movie.
Right.
What could be marketed? What would be acceptable? And of course, before such a movie is made, there's a big marketing research done. And so it is a movie for the under 45 and under. If you're 45 and under, this is your movie. What is it about and if you're 30, what is it about this cohort? It's the cohort that has never seen the mass movement, never educated about it, most of whom have gone to college, poorly educated, as most college students are, with very little sense of anything but this postmodern Afrofuturism, Afro-pessimism. You can't even talk about Baldwin. I like Baldwin because he's a queer Black writer and I'm queer. Well, no, he isn't. That's not his identity. You see what I'm saying? So a whole universe of ideas and tropes and other things have been created for them, and thus they perhaps are the most easy to cognitively manipulate.
Right.
All they've seen is advertisement. Everything is how you look, and it's become a bit off the chain. All of these attractive Black models, et cetera, attractive.
Right. Yeah.
Which most people, men or women, will never be. And plus, even if it could be that, you don't have the proper lighting to be presented that way. So, but that's all. So they exist most in a bubble created by marketing, the ruling class, and psychological manipulation. They are unable, for the most part, to make an independent aesthetic, cultural, or intellectual judgment about hardly anything. And thus, unlike those who are over 45, let us say, they are very difficult to talk to or to convince. The soundtrack of their lives is hip hop or what they would call neo soul or something like that. They don't like jazz. And let me get through this quickly. Most things that they prefer are based upon a judgment, their own judgment, based upon what they have seen. Books are not important. Celebrities are. Now, I'm talking about intellectual celebrities. Baldwin is not important. Ibram Kendi is. You see what I'm saying? I'm a feminist, therefore, Audre Lorde, bell hooks. So it is, it's highly individual. They don't join organizations. If they do, if they have, they want to do activism, well, I'll be an activist for 6 months. Commitments are very difficult for them to make. This is the psychological profile of a generation or two. And it's true. And so this movie is made for that. Tailor-made, not too long, got everything you need. A Black star with muscles, pretty Black woman, the white oppressor who is a vampire. You know what I'm saying? It is uncomplicated. And in the background of all of this is Trump is the president.
Yeah.
And so this is the last thing I'll say on this. A friend of mine who's an official, high official in the AME church, he wrote on Facebook that times are bad. Trump was elected. But we will be saved by Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl and Simmons. This is a grown man now, with certain authority in a major Black institution. Now, you know what Kendrick Lamar is known for. outside of some of his albums and the Super Bowl performance. This song he had, "We Gonna Be All Right." We're gonna be all right. Well, are there not a number of things we have to do if we gonna be all right? You said it's like reducing everything to the lowest, most absurd, almost infantile level. I would suggest to you that one of the great enemies of ideological clarity for Black young people is the African American Studies program, which are variously named. See, when they came out, they were named Black Studies. Oh, that wasn't good enough. So it went to African American. They said that's an Africana study, you know. So now, or sometimes you hear Africa diaspora studies. You understand? So it's a way of trying to include all of Africa without including the world and the history of the world and the history of consciousness. It is such a major counter-revolution against where we were that it's unbelievable. Now, that's where I saw this movie. I know, I think Purba responded to it differently. She said, "Doc, you don't want to see it." But it really, I mean, I maybe because you said it and you prepared me, but I felt it was so poorly done that it would not have the impact that they would hope for. I think it was less well done than his other film, Black Panther, which was, I think, had a deeper influence, a deeper footprint among Black people, although that wasn't lasting. I think, there's one other thing, I think that, another part of this is that the to be a celebrity. They have to make a celebrity of him. So he's a representative of Black achievement. Now, nobody tries to get behind the whole narrative and say, well, who put up the money for this? You know what I'm saying? Who made you who you have become? It's just like Ibram Kendi. You know, he is celebrated. He goes to Boston University. And in the blink of an eye, he got $55 million for a research center and never published a paper. So everybody said, well, because you know, with academics, you know, academics could write proposals for 10 years in order to just get $20,000 to do research on unequal housing in North Philadelphia. Suddenly, this dude got 55 million. Then they ran into some contradictions with the money, which is not unusual. And he had to leave Boston University, where he had a prestigious endowed chair. In case you don't know what that means, you know, like let's say Kathy Young, after she makes her millions.
Right. Oh, yes.
Say, I want to set up a chair in African American studies, and I will endow it with $10 million. And so the university, whatever professor is there, the university put up 1/4, and the rest of his or her salary would come from endowments, from the endowment. And the more money is in the endowed chair, the more prestigious it is. They brought Kendi to Boston University and gave him a chair that was only occupied by one person previous to him. His name, Elie Wiesel. Well-respected and well-known Zionist, apologist, and, you know, I mean, come on. So you gonna give the Jewish chair, and that's what it was, to this black dude that had no real academic record. You have academics, white and black, that work for years just to get a full professorship. You understand what I'm saying? This cat suddenly he's a made man, but then he has to leave Boston University. And this is supposed to be making a black move. I'm going back to my roots at Howard University. Well, first of all, your roots ain't at Howard University. You never went there. So he go back to Howard. He's at Howard. My question is, because it's always, follow the money. I said, what happened with the 55 million? Where's that? Did you leave that at Boston University? Or how much of it was in your hand? Or were you just a tool? But anyway, I say all that to say, the ruling class, in order to conduct its narratives, in order to make their narrative plausible, i.e., racial progress is going forward, in order for them to bring on MSNBC Al Sharpton, man, we out here fighting against and we making progress. And therefore, the corporations and the various Zionist organizations and rich white people need to give us more money because I got to keep my apartment in Manhattan. I got to live large, and I got to do my thing. And for me to effectively be a civil rights leader, I need to make $1 million a year. You see what I'm saying? This is the modern day civil rights leader. And so on. I'm not talking to you. So this is to make the ruling class narrative plausible, you have to have evidence. Look at LeBron James. Why are you black people angry at the ruling class? We're helping y'all. You get angry at the working class. You see what I'm saying? And so now it's the playoff season. Look at all them black players. Well, what about the ones from Eastern Europe who is just as good about it? Yeah, man, and LeBron and Kobe and all of that celebrity thing. So you need Coogler to be a celebrity. Not just to sell the movie, but to sell the system. And our music conference symposium, I don't know whether we'll tell all, because we want y'all to, if we tell you everything that's going to happen, you won't come out next week.
Remember that.
Well, if I tell them everything, they say, well, I know what's going to happen, I don't have to come. And then there are people listening on the live stream, they say, well, I know what they're going to talk about. I can't tell you everything we're going to say about Sun Ra. But anyway, we've been working very hard, especially then. It's been very emotional, wouldn't you say? Very emotional. Not because of our discoveries of the greatness of the music. And I say greatness, we're not just using technical measurement. We're talking about the civilizational significance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've taken essentially 3 composers. We're looking at jazz, what became known as jazz, which emerges in the 20th century. It didn't mean it displaced blues or the songs, but a new musical form for a new political moment, or as we've put it, a new origins of a new movement of world thought. That idea makes it almost more understandable to us, and it gives us, I think I'm right about the capacity to create a narrative out of all of this music to make sense. In fact, we challenge the idea that, quote, we are a blues people. Mm-hmm. We put it as we are people fighting for freedom. Mm-hmm. We talk about our spiritual aspirations and so on. To singularize us in the blues makes Sun Ra, Ellington, and Mingus not understandable. Is that would you say that's a fair statement? I think that's fair. You can't, if you're only looking for the blues or the minor chords based on minor key, you ain't gonna understand the majority of Sun Ra's work. You can't understand. Or Duke or Mingus. You know, because everything is not in the minor key. Right. You know? So that's one thing. But the other thing that we're discovering in the face of this neo-minstrelsy and bootlicking and timing in pop culture, and just a sense of having thrown in the towel, I'm just doing this because I'm trying to keep my job or pay my bills, of jazz musicians. One thing we see this ourselves. Jazz musicians are the most boring, uninteresting people you ever want to meet. It's just like a calculus teacher in high school. You want to meet a person you never want to meet again, you know, unless maybe at a bar where they're drunk. It's a calculus teacher. They're boring. You know what I'm saying? Maybe y'all had a different experience. I did not. That's why a lot of people leave math and go the very opposite into painting or sculpting, you know, but because they don't believe in what they're doing or in what they say. But then we go to this music. It let us know that, first of all, the music has been erased. What most musicians and jazz enthusiasts or jazz heads know is it's like an obligatory thing. I'm a jazz head. I'm down with jazz. I got to go to this concert. I got to show up. But it's not with enthusiasm. And therefore, the jazz audience gets older and older, crippled, blind, dead, coming in wheelchairs and walkers, sometimes in stretchers. I mean, what is it? The music of the living, walking dead or some shit? And then the musicians, they can barely stand up and hardly playing and talking. But you see, you get the picture. And then they condemn everybody else. Don't nobody understand this music. Hell no, you don't understand it. I'm trying to keep the music alive. I don't want to hear it. No, but what you mad at you? And I can play, and all that. And come to find out, they're more ignorant than the audience. And I know for us, to access this music is to access a body.
Oh, I don't think it's one of us.
This is a major body of knowledge, philosophically, scientifically, civilization. Major body of knowledge. Just one last thing. I think we will, in this conference, and I hope everybody comes to actively participate.
Yes.
We will, I think, show the results of our planning and of our research. And members of the planning group have been, I mean, the research has been unbelievable. So much so that I think, maybe, you all tell me if I'm right about this, that we have discovered, maybe, this is a bold statement, that Sun Ra might be the end of jazz. And the announcement of something new for the future. As crazy as it might seem to people who think that he is a carnival show and so on. And as great as all of these figures are, he might be the most significant, coming with a narrative that seems wild and absurd. I'm not from here, I'm from Saturn. Question is, what do you mean by that? All of this. And then you listen to that music guided by fundamental concepts, not guided by how I feel or something like this. Well, I think this morning I'm gonna play this. Guided by a worldview and a concept of the future. Well, that was with Mingus and Ellington too. I mean, there's no question. Even if you never had a Sun Ra and you just had Mingus and Ellington, world music would never be the same. But once you put Sun Ra along with them, it is clear that music can never be the same.
Right, right.
That the Western trajectory is forever altered. And that to speak about music in the future, one must speak about this music as the beginning of a new movement. So that's what
Doc, I wanted to add something to the end of your remarks, but I think that for the symposium, something that, and we've said this in the planning as meeting as well, something that we want to assert and then reassert is this ideological counter-revolution on the music, and how even before I think we began our research for the music symposium, I think we had underestimated the scale of this counter-revolution, because the burning question that I think you're also raising is, the more we look at these musicians, and not just these musicians, but that musical world that they were operating out of at that time, all these artists were always fused to the movement, like, how do I say it? The movement of world consciousness and the movement of world history. And I think that they saw this as the lifeblood or the well from which their music emerged. And I think when you're describing the current state of this music or the current state of these musicians, it is such a great anomaly compared to the evidence of what we've discovered in the 100-year course of Black music. And sorry, I'm a little sick today, so it's a little hard for me to think. No, it's okay. But I think I just want to emphasize that I think this is why it was very important that when we began to frame the symposium, we were very firm in staking it on the new world movement of thought, because in some ways it was important for us to begin on a new epistemic ground that begins with the Du Boisian formulation of the world, so that we could actually separate our investigation of the music from all of this ideological misinterpretation that has been layered onto
Yeah.
it, which is what you're talking about with the movie as well. Like many points, for example. And I think three key ideologies that have distorted the music in the last few decades is Afrofuturism, maybe more than all, Afrocentrism and Afropessimism. And all three of these have been used to distort what is the meaning of Black music. But I think again, just that pure evidence. If you can begin separate from these ideologies, the musicians say it themselves, the music speaks for itself, the evidence of their lives all makes that case of if you separate the music from the world conscious movement toward a struggle toward a higher consciousness, the music dies, there is no music. And I think that's part of what Sun Ra was anticipating as well, or even beginning to live through, is this new period of interregnum. Like for it, even when you were talking, I was thinking about, like, for example, Gil Scott Heron's song, like Winter in America, and how, with Sun Ra, we're beginning to see that winter set in. And yeah, I think it's an important idea for us to consider is this the music of the epoch until we can emerge, find a way out of this new, qualitatively new period of crisis, beginning with the counter-revolution on the Third American Revolution, entering into a period of interregnum, and like leap to a new epoch, struggle to find our way into a new epoch. I mean, I have a lot more that I was thinking about from what you said. Oh. Well, actually, your remarks clarified a lot of what we've been discussing about Mingus and why, in some ways, Mingus. I mean, I think you should speak about Sun Ra, but I think Mingus has been interesting because I think the more that we looked at him, the more that we realized that there has been a genuine assassination of his ideology, his thinking as a philosopher, his artistry, and like even just him as a man, as a human being. But we have been increasingly impressed or just humbled by his sheer courage, his sheer moral courage, especially placing him in the context of his peers and in that historical moment. And a lot of what you were saying actually made me think back to Mingus a lot. And it was actually this thing that you brought up of sacred music. And sacred music.
Sacred.
Because he says this a few times in this book, which is in a long form interview, but he begins to make a defense of Black music and jazz in particular as what he hopes will be the sacred music of his people. And I think more than any pure musician in terms of that level of commercial success or, professional success, he more than anyone, more than Coltrane, more than Miles Davis, more than Monk, more than any of his contemporaries, was very hard on that white commercialization of the music, that white control of the music. And it's because as an artist and as a revolutionary, he wanted to come in hard with that defense of this music is sacred and it must be defended and it must be protected so that my people do not die. And so that my children can find a way, so that they can find a light. And he also lived until he also began to witness the counter-revolution. He lived past King's assassination, and he also speaks about what he feels is a rise of essentially a Black misleadership. But I think Mingus is important because so much of what we've been trying to formulate and reformulate in preschool, in our conversations with each other, in our reading groups, in our planning meetings, is how do we and how will we mount a defense of this music for this time? And I think the more that we treat these musicians with a lot of seriousness as exemplars of people who were making that defense, actually the more clearly we see them. And I think that's, just this thing of, for example, Mingus talked about jazz as a conscious music, and he lamented that the majority of Black folk were more attracted to rhythm and blues or gospel than jazz at this time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he was insisting or trying to bend the music so that he could bend the people toward that higher consciousness, where jazz could become the sacred music, the sacred music of my people, of the people. And then with Sun Ra in particular, I think something important that we've been talking about, and that I think will also be important to the core of the conference, is this is a statement that Doc had made, that maybe Sun Ra, more than any other composer, contains the kernel for us ideologically, that we begin from, that there's the strongest ideological parallel that we're working out of is with Sun Ra. And something that we're still clarifying, but again, I think will also be worked out through the conference, is the epistemic break that happens with Sun Ra in particular. So he is coming from a separate moment as Charles Mingus and Duke Ellington. And so, for example, with Sun Ra, he's from Birmingham, and he actually, given how futuristic his music is, I think for me it was easier to assume that he's a contemporary to Mingus, or that he's maybe even born a little later. But he's actually born in 1914. And I think like we've all seen this quality in him or in his music to some extent, but he is so ancient, like an Egyptian god, right? So more than any composer, he embodies that ancient and the futuristic. And then when you look into his life, you begin to see why. He's a Black Southerner from Birmingham, and he doesn't leave until the 1940s. But beginning in the 1930s, he begins to say, I think in the mid-1930s, he begins to say or assert, my origins, my origins are in Saturn. My origins are otherworldly. And this is something that we've been trying to interpret, and actually like our understanding of the NOI helps a lot, which is why this need for this separate mythology. So once again, Sun Ra from early on, I totally agree that you can't identify Sun Ra's music through technique or through like a shape or a method, because I think that Sun Ra's music is popularized in a way where you kind of hear the same songs over and over, like Door of the Cosmos, or you know, the women vocals with this like otherworldly beat. But I think more than any of the composers, his music is highly prolific. Like, okay, boogie woogie, blues, and then like whatever, orchestral, European influence, like so much, right? So much. And then you have that space sound that comes in. And it really can only be explained by the creation and the development and a commitment to
Can I just say something?
An entirely new worldview.
No, I just want to say that you know, when he says he is from a different planet, he is trying to account for his genius. Where did this come from? You know what I'm saying? So it is, he feels it is from another world, another space. The other thing, I just wanted to amplify what you were saying. He produced more albums, more music than any recording of any musician, composer of history. His body of work is massive, and his piano playing, he shows mastery of every form of jazz and even classical piano styles and so on for over 100 years. He is a pianistic master, I want to say. And so it is from the, go ahead, but that's all I want to say.
Well, stepping back from this symposium a little bit and back to your remarks, like for that conversation about someone who had made a criticism of preschool, which raised the question, like,
Yes.
Are you guys hard enough on Trump? Like, we didn't talk for too long about it, but what I said to him and what I needed to say is like, so the burning question is, what do we do? Like, what is our responsibility? And what I needed to say is like, I can make an agreement with you that we're in a crisis of leadership, and that white leadership will never take us where we need this country and the people of this country, the disenfranchised people of this country need to go. But you, like you as a lover, as a protector, as a defender, as a follower of this music, we share a common task, which is to fuse ourselves to the will of the people, fuse ourselves to the people, which means to fuse ourselves and to to re-incubate, to share, to renew this music, which in many ways is the key to reshaping or purifying the consciousness of the people who have been so brutally distorted in the way they see the future, the way they see themselves, whether or not they love themselves in the society, the way they see their relationship to white supremacy. Like that needs to be purified, it needs to be healed so that Black leadership can emerge again. And like, I think we can all agree on the crisis of white leadership, but I'm making a very close connection with like what you're saying about like where this attack about Trump is coming from. And I feel like I'm not saying it the best, but how it makes us like need to come in harder about why this music symposium, but also why this music, why this defense, and again, just that fusion back to how this music is essentially a revolutionary march or a revolutionary light for the American people that we are not seeing anywhere else, like in this country right now. Well, okay, well, I guess to put it a slightly different way, like in a time when we don't have clear Black leadership anymore, but we have Black misleadership in the concrete, is this music not a form of like eternal Black leadership?
Oh, yes.
And I think that needs to be said, or that is the quality that needs to be drawn out, like from our event.
To like sort of like I was thinking of like going back to what we started with and what we were just saying before. I think we have been talking about Trump and what you said in terms of like really seeing him as part of this transition that we're going through. Like to miss this at this point is to miss everything. And I mean, we've been talking about this for a while, and in different reading groups and public reading groups and so on, this question keeps coming up. And I think what the free school has been doing is to really say that regardless of what Trump the figure is, you have to understand the Trump movement. And of course, it may have contradictions, but what we are seeing is that it's an opening for the democratic capacity of people. And I think what you were, like the way you reintroduced how we've been looking at Trump is very useful. It's indispensable, I think, for us because we are at a crucial time. We are looking at, a changing world order. We're also looking at an American society that's going through. It's almost like we're looking for an opening. We're looking for some kind of a breakthrough, and like the present and like the Trump movement, it signifies the possibilities of that. And so, I'm saying this to say that how you began with this discussion talking about how we see Trump is. I think this is extremely crucial because it has everything to do with how really what the ideological onslaught of the ruling class is.
Yeah.
And so I think talk about Trump and then what you were saying about this movie that comes out now, but it's not just this one movie. But I think the way you put it was that it's not just to sell the movie, but it's to sell a system.
Yeah.
And really, the part looking at Trump, Trump is such an essential figure to fully understand, or the Trump movement being essential to understand in order to understand the nature and the dimensions of this onslaught of this. The ideological onslaught, which has led to this cognitive control and manipulation of of all people under like from 80s onwards, the people who have not seen revolutionary times. And like really also the other thing is like with like at the same time that we have not seen a revolutionary time, it's also the time when the university that became such an entrenched force for ideological control.
Yeah.
And
So
like all these figures. I mean, the way you connected the movie and Trump, and then these figures that keep being thrown at us, like Kennedy being an example that's going to be forgotten soon, but he served his purpose. And the movie is sort of like that. It's like we're going to forget the movie, but these narratives do play a role. They do play a role in like I think they play a role in narrowing the possibilities of people to think about the ways forward, to really think about what this, what this music, but also what are your possibilities today? Like, what are you prepared to do now? And I was thinking of this, like what Michelle was saying about this conversation she had with somebody about, why Trump and so on. And the question that I always come to, and I appreciated what what you were putting, Michelle, that like, yeah, what are you prepared to do, and what do you see your task as? And I think that changes the meaning of this question of where do you stand? Because it's not a question of establishing your credentials or establishing your sides on a football team, but really talking about what like how do you see people moving forward. So I think that was like really important to look at it. But the other thing I wanted to say was okay, two things. Like firstly, like what you were saying about Africa being used today as a signifier of exclusiveness. I think this is and I think last week also we talked about this when I think Jeremiah was bringing up like, yeah, what does it mean to be black? Like what do you mean by blackness, and like what is the essence of the history of this country, which is the history of Black America, which is the history of a new stage in the revolutionary process. And it makes all the sense that like over the last with the counter revolution beginning after the assassination of King, it stretched on it has taken on such epic proportions where every facade of life is be it like knowledge and university, and then popular culture and art, even what you're saying about jazz musicians today, like even like what's considered serious music, all of it is in some way or the other they are all affected by it, and they're all they've all been turned into tools of control of some kind. I think they've been turned into like they're markers of where they're markers of or I think they try to play the role of touchstones, and the result being that people are increasingly discouraged to think on their own, to think for themselves, come up with their own idea. I think even with this movie, somebody was saying, I don't know who, it's like at this point to because this movie has become such a, I mean, I think it seems, I mean, I don't know if this is right, but it seems very popular. It's it's really high. I think it's very critically acclaimed. That's sort of how they put it. To say anything to criticize this movie is the, oh, okay, now you're a racist. Now that you talk about this kind of, and which is, yeah, the most infantile, infantile way to understand anything that we're talking about. Yeah. So I mean, I was thinking of what you were what you were saying about the movie. It was really important. Maybe I can stop there, but I also wanted to say a bit about Sunra, because I've been like I haven't listened to Sandra at all, like for like ever. And I think I find Sandra the hardest to understand.
Yeah.
Like his music, I find it very hard to understand. But listening to some of his interviews and how he talks, I think what you were saying, Michelle, about him being an epistemic break, I think it's very clarifying. I was thinking of the way he talks about language, for instance. He
Yeah.
talks about language as something that defines a people, and I think he says he's saying that he's talking about how language has always defined a civilization, and it's like he's telling black people, like he's telling African Americans to really understand, like you have to really understand yourself. And he says this thing. He says, I think somebody asks him, like, why is there so much depression out there? Why why are people so depraved and sad? And he says that it's because I think he says that it's because there is not the right music that speaks to their to their spirit, that's attuned to their spirit.
Yes.
And he says this in terms of a language. He sees, I think, partly he sees his music as a new language, like universal or something new, like a new. I mean, that's what I was thinking. In terms of like language and his search for the way he talks about food. And I think this is something you were saying before. Yeah, the equation. Yes, yeah.
Say that again.
Like she was talking about the equations and
Equations, yes.
but something you were saying today morning about the creation of the new human being. I think I was thinking in terms of how what he's saying seems to me to be a defense or create the need for a new civilization almost.
There's no two ways.
And how do you it also says something about how he is seen, like like the first Filipino research tells you that he's supposed to be the pioneer of Afrofuturism. Yeah, as simple as that. But then I think everything that he's saying, if you like the most infantile understanding of that, the most literal, the most infantile understanding will lead you to that. It's like okay, you are talking about Africa, you are talking about space, you are talking about planet Earth and so on. So it's like the most infantile understanding of him has somehow been canonized, has somehow been. I mean, that's what you find out, that this is what
put it in canon.
Yeah.
but I say that to say that I'm seeing also from like what we were talking about last week, that the symposium is an intervention. It's an intervention that is totally needed. Because what happens to like not just Black America, but what happens to the world if this contribution is lost?
Yeah,
It's not
there you
understood.
go.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, I also liked the comparison, Doc, that you made between free school and Sunrise, the orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty deep
I'm
because
sorry.
no, that's pretty deep because actually it was the first. In some ways, I think I agree with Humberto. It's just Sunrise was always the hardest for me to understand, and actually.
Even last night.
Oh no! So okay, so
Let's talk about the
no. 1 week ago,
Yeah.
is when I started. Well, because it's kind of like what Michelle was saying, where you have to take the musicians themselves seriously.
Yeah.
You have to take artists seriously in order to understand the art. Because I think today, like even let's take the movie Sinners, there's a reduction of understanding, whether it's music or film or anything, as an aesthetic or a technique over the worldview. And in fact, you could say the science and the thought. And for me, that's why I like the comparison between Free School and Sun Ra, because like the way you described, where you're like, okay, if you approach understanding something like Free School as an aesthetic, right? Like as a mere aesthetic, you don't actually really understand the depth of what free school both is and meant to become in terms of the methodology, the science, and even how you were like, that's why when you're emphasizing that free school's method, principle, purpose, and scientific analysis of today is correct. And the question is, are you taking free schools seriously enough as a band of artists or as thinkers or scientists in order to actually appreciate that of what we're saying of like even prophesizing of the future? It kind of makes sense where we were like, the orchestra, the Sun Ra Orchestra is an many unusual people, unusual suspects bound together by a common destiny and purpose and worldview or science, you could say science, which is why Sun Ra is always like, yeah, he always says, he's like, I'm not really that interested in creativity. I'm interested in discipline. He's like,
freedom.
Oh, freedom.
Yeah.
No, he said discipline.
He said, but not creative.
No, he says creativity.
He says.
Yeah, he says in
he said
interviews.
freedom. I'm not.
He says
freedom,
Yeah.
I think in the interview he says creativity.
Yeah. Maybe I didn't.
He said
Yeah, he says because he's making a point where he's like, musicians nowadays think that they need to just go uber crazy on the creativity to please people. He's like, I'm not into, he's like, we already have enough energy. The problem is are you focusing the energy in the right place?
Right.
Which is why he emphasizes discipline. But I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like deep, the comparison between the Sun Ra Orchestra and free school, because it's kind of like the similar thing where you were like, I connected it to what you said later about the sinners. It's actually very deep and important to say, to clarify this thing of, in some ways, it is a sort of minimizing to insist that we are a blues people rather than we are people struggling for freedom.
Yeah.
Because it's a way of also reducing even not only the revolutionary technology of this country, like you're skipping over the civil rights movement and transformation of the American people in becoming, but it's also a way of not understanding that this is a music of modernity. Because like even this idea of, okay, well, before the blues, there was also the sorrow songs. And the way Du Bois is like, you need to understand that you don't even have to know anything about technique or aesthetic to understand the sorrow songs as an articulate message of the slave to the world. And that message of the slave to the world is one of modernity. Or you could say that the problem of the 20th century is that's a universal message for humanity. Which is why before the blues, there's even the sorrow songs, blues, and jazz. And that jazz is also an advanced message of modernity. And in fact, it's like achieving a sort of, it advances this kind of articulation that Du Bois is saying you need to be able to see. And the reason why I felt like that was really deep when you were like, the symposium is going to clarify that let's not just stop or minimize this into a thing of we're a blues people, but rather we're a people struggling for freedom and have searched for all the different ways to articulate a message for humanity, that message of modernity, an alternative modernity. Was kind of deep because like in some ways that's kind of like the only way to understand free school is if you can also understand Ellington, Mingus, Sun Ra as part of the same, like that same expansion of seeking to articulate a message of modernity for humanity. Because otherwise we would just be like, oh, what is free school? Free school is just like a bunch of like nerds and weirdos who study whatever. But to see all of this as part of essentially a new world movement of thought, like similar to the sorrow songs, similar to Duke and what Sun Ra's trying to say. Because last night when you listen to Sun Ra, especially like the way his music also changes in the different decades and along his own journey from Birmingham to Chicago to New York and then finally to Philadelphia, I think a lot of people, the reason why I was always turned off by Sun Ra is people do, like, I never use the word like carnival or circus, but actually people reduce Sun Ra to basically the way we're used to seeing celebrities, which is like, they're just performers. Like it's about the performance and, oh, he's just wearing sparkles.
A different form of, let us say, rock, punk rock.
Yes.
It's a kind of a challenging norms.
Yeah, right.
But not creatively proposing something.
Like a vision for humanity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And
humanity never comes into the discussion.
Right, because like actually most people, the reason why I never really liked I never looked into him was because I was used to feeling like, oh, well, if all these like super
Right.
hip white people, like a lot of people who listen to Sun Ra are like, oh, I'm not like other white people. I listen to Sun Ra. Like I don't just like Coltrane or Thelonious Monk. I listen to Sun Ra. And so I was like, I'm always a contrarian, so I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna listen to Sun Ra. I like Thelonious Monk. Or I'm gonna go for the real. Like, I'm not even gonna listen to jazz. I'm gonna listen to rhythm and blues. But actually, when you listen, once you start understanding Sun Ra and listening to him, you realize that he is actually doing like very deep science in the way that Du Bois or even Kant does science. Someone who is so like, I actually got this from Raju, but he was like, when he was like, oh yeah, Kant actually was he wasn't from the center of Germany. He was in the outskirts of Germany. In fact, the outskirts of Germany that were in Russia. And it's like, that's exactly the same like Sun Ra, the outskirts of the like abandoned lands of the South, like in Birmingham, like the most like deep South, like called the most violent city by King. And from there, like you have Sun Ra who goes on this journey. And when you listen to his music, you really do get the sense where you're like, he's not playing the blues at all. Yet he's playing the song, he's playing music from the Black proletariat that almost like simultaneously talks about the history, the revolutionary history of the United States, but also talks about like the need, like the future, this alternative modernity, this alternative like better world, and what it demands of human beings. I don't know. It was pretty deep because it does remind me of preschool. Yeah. Like who would have thought out of these unusual suspects in this room that we're changing the future of humanity through ideas, through the same tradition of science, science for humanity, of humanity, science that believes in, like basically what Mao would call the mud. Like, and so, yeah.
I guess it's like, sorry, Purba. There's a lot to say, obviously. I think organizing the music symposium, there's a lot of things to get right, the biographical, the where, why, meaning why the music was made, what were they saying specifically, and the ideological landscape that people, because, there's another question of like, who's going to come to this event, and how can you defend a musician? Like one of the commenters on the feed are like, well, I'm not interested in this genre. Well, are we talking about genre or are we talking about something different? And when you had said about music being a part of the ideological struggle, then you had to explain, well, why is the ideological struggle even like important? Meaning, like all these words, ideological, political, the spiritual are all a little fucked up because, there's different, pansy people who don't want to take responsibility for things, meaning ideological. Okay, so if you mean what you say and you think about it in the scope of knowledge itself, and you want to write on the epitaphs of like, the walls of everything, if you want to talk on that scale, then obviously you're like authoritarian, or like you're not, like you're delegitimized in some way. If you're political, now we're talking about governmental systems or like controlling, like there's different problems with the word political that people have, because they don't want to take responsibility for stuff. Or spiritual, like all of a sudden now you're just out of the world, you're not concrete enough, you're not speaking to anything that makes any logical sense. Logical, all these words are fucked up. But like, it with Sun Ra, there's like something that like, I've always liked about Sun Ra, like, and it annoyed me when like, obviously I would be the one to like look into Sun Ra more because the whole North Philadelphia Germantown thing, okay, uptown, they're like more bougie and like people are more like, whatever, and as opposed to like North Philly and stuff. But if you go like 22nd Dolphin, 22nd Susquehanna, they talk about the same things. They have the exact same phenomenology of life, that's the same, whether it be like Africa, Egypt, or whatever. Like I remember seeing like a door or whatever, and there's like all this music of somebody who studies, like you pass by people who do things like this or whatever. But so like, and then the woo woo thing is like, okay, well, how is it that, or what effect basically, which is a question that everybody has, like that Sunrise has on music or whatever. So I thought it was interesting that we have the four composers, the four musicians, the four thinkers, philosophers, the four people who defended the freedom struggle, the four people that we will defend because we want to make more space, like you were saying, an intervention, but like we're at a time where we're making space. Like this shit is real, and like we're charging forward in a very strong manner. You know, so anyway, preschool and music symposium planning as well. So anyway, I think it's interesting, like that Duke Ellington, for example, is somebody that in that in a way we're ending with Sun Ra, but an expression of Sun Ra or something that we're trying to understand better is Bootsy. So we're ending with Bootsy, but in a way we're ending with Duke and Sun Ra, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
really.
But so with Duke, there's something that happens also that we all have to like kind of dig for a second. We're like, wow. The expression, the amalgamation of people, the way that was the aesthetic, was the landscape of an entire moment in the 20th century, whether that be the earliest or throughout. Like you can always go back to like the Harlem and see or listen to Caravan or whatever, and everybody knows these songs. Everybody would go to these as standards. Why? Is it because of the, like you were saying, the logical, technical, written or whatever? No, it has to do with the purpose of the music, the essence of the music. So that gets back to, okay, are we talking about genres? Are we talking about the soul? Are we talking about what like is right for the soul? And it's kind of like you can sit around and listen to hip hop all day, but does it move you, or are you forced to move? And so like if you listen to Sun Ra all day for like a month, like does it make you think, or are you just thinking? Like what happens to you? And like that's part of the thing with Sun Ra. So what's interesting about Sun Ra also is like, you know, he is like I wanted to say to what you're pointing out, his uses of opposites are interesting because, like, in a Robert Mueller documentary, he was like, "I'm sitting in front of the White House. That means that there should be a Black House." Or like, there's something that, like, one of the musicians were talking about how he had to make a drum, and like, you know, lightning had struck a tree across the way. And so I forget exactly what he had said. But it was like if lightning struck that tree, then there should have been another. Like there should like there's this thing about mirrors and opposites, which is something what you're saying about like the equations and why is there equations? What is the makings of the equations, and how does that also fit with like his uses of opposites, or like what is he thinking about? Like why is he thinking in that way? And like the story always goes like he was addressed to by an outer being, which is what you're trying to explain. Like what you're explaining about his consciousness, meaning how he rationalizes his intelligence. Like, at the same time though, like in his music and his poetry, he's speaking from the perspective of an entirely new being, which gives me an understanding that the Third American Revolution and King, that whole conversation that we're having about the new human being, like you're saying, contextualizes how he can ultimately become not only different, but make it possible for other people to address what is real or what in this way is different, but like this, so there's like a whole thing with Sun Ra. And I'm glad that we were gonna kind of work it out more. Like there's always a lot to talk about. But I'm only saying that to say that like the music symposium obviously is very emotional and very necessary, like we know. And the reason is not looked at, though like in my head, I'm like, okay, so are the people like waiting, to see like the empire fall and like, to see what happens, because in my opinion, like there's I think how we talk about the movie and the ideological struggle is paramount because people are afraid. But then there's people who are not as afraid, that might come into the symposium, whether we know it or not. And we want to be free. And like that's kind of the point. Like so I'm kind of taken aback. I'm like in a whole bag with Sun Ra, but I think Duke Ellington. Okay, so another thing that Michelle said yesterday that was like really on point about Mingus was like, Mingus saw like what he said about Watts, how the people were put, you would say it best, were put in,
Well, manipulated.
like the whole image of Watts was manipulated to the public.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
He contested it.
Yeah.
The narrative of the Watts.
Right.
He's like, that's not black to me. Yeah.
Right. And like, I don't think that any of these musicians would be opposed to how we're framing.
Yes.
Yes. Say it one more time.
How we are talking about these.
They would not oppose.
They would not oppose. Like the context where what we are standing on. When we're talking about these four men. And in whatever expression that they would have to respond to it, because I would, I kind of imagine also that like we're calling in different like spirits and like, it would be like, what would Sun Ra say? Like, what would Duke Ellington say? Like, what would Mingus like if he came in? Like, how would he, but we're calling that attention also because that's the power. We're empowering the people. This is the power of the people, and we're emphasizing that this power comes in a concrete manifestation within the music and cannot be taken by any white supremacist or any ruling elite or anything that is antagonistic or an evil force upon society, because the music is a representative of the defense or of an offense against evil. But that's to say the whole BS around the artist cannot be a revolutionary or the artist cannot be a political force or, is a type of silo the real civilizational or spiritual feeling or real meaning of anything. Like it's kind of weird that everything gets so cut up into different, like a mathematician is a mathematician or like the chef is chef, but not, like the artist is a part of the flower of society, of the basis, of the ground, and wherever they would go, wherever we would go, everything will be able to be born from. Like it's not, and it can't happen if this soul is cut up into different parts. But yeah, I'm what I was feeling the other day about the symposium specifically, that is just to say that with no unapologetic terms do I stand on, I stand with what we're saying about music, I stand with what we're saying about the revolutionary struggle, and that this is it's even better to be strong, like to be unapologetic.
Well, I feel like what I'm really drawing from this and what's really I also connect with is just that yeah, when you look at these artists, and then also, I'm really glad we're talking about Sun Ra because I also didn't understand him all that well, but until I started reading about his life. And when you just start realizing what it meant for him throughout his whole life to stand by his vision and like his music and all the sacrifices he made, and like he just forged on through his entire life, and it wasn't always guaranteed that this would be heard. Even like you do feel like you have the courage, in a sense, like people who are now trying to understand that legacy, understand all this. Basically, like I think understand like studying these musicians' lives has given me, I think, a renewed sense of courage to do what we do in free school, because if it was like possible for them to, yeah, I mean, there's a story actually that I don't think we've talked a lot about, but when Sun Ra was coming up, it was actually, he was drafted into World War II,
Yes.
but then actually by then already he was ready to say, I will never lift a finger for this country and also, or like this war, because that like I like, if my task on this earth is, yeah, like is to actually take seriously like morality and also peace, then you can't, like, I'm not even objecting to the war as a conscientious objector, even though he brought in a Bible to like argue with the draft board. He was like, no, like at first the board was like, oh, you're one of these conscientious objectors, you brought in a Bible, you're going to give me the same song and dance. He was like, no, have you even read this thing? He's like, don't you realize? And he's like, oh shoot, like, and so essentially it's something I think there's something really special about what we're doing, because I do feel like to even learn about the story of Mingus, for example, like for Mingus to stand by this vision, his music, his whole life, and really never be paid properly for it, to never even fully, and for him to also go down in history as like an irascible, angry man of jazz, like how heartbreaking that must have been for him. But I feel like that's something that I think we've also had to learn through this process in free school, and also in the process of actually taking seriously, yeah, I like this phrase of like taking seriously these artists as revolutionaries, and what it meant to like, what it really means to, like, as the title of our symposium, like seize this future. Like, I think it also, I think I really appreciate today's free school, because I feel like even understanding ourselves by seeing ourselves in the orchestra or seeing ourselves in these musicians, we become so much more, I think, capable, or like more ready to do what we're like meant to do in this time of crisis. And yeah, that's what I was really picking up on what you were saying, Serafina. And I mean, I feel like even within the orchestra itself, like you had, you know, Sun Ra from Birmingham, but then when he goes to Chicago, like he meets John Gilmore and Pat Patrick, who are also like probably also in their 20s or just graduated from high school, like who are also these prolific like musicians, but all from what you call like a segregated high school, DuSable High School. Yeah, like back then, like, you know, musicians who like could have become like prolific individual artists, but actually when they came into like to know Sun Ra, and even then before he necessarily put together the orchestra, he was already ready for something very expansive of a concept of what music could be, what musicians could be. And that was enough for them to give up, I think, their lives to become part of something like this. And then Marshall Allen from Kentucky, like fighting, I think, in World War II, but coming back as like as a saxophonist, like one by one, I feel like it's a story that like I think free school mirrors really beautifully. Like when you see this larger vision of what your life could be in the pursuit of knowledge, in the pursuit of science. Like when they would rehearse, it wasn't just like, I mean, they're all like, when you watch that documentary that you mentioned, the Robert Moog one, like they're crammed into like this like small room in their Germantown home, knee to knee, instrument to instrument, and Sun Ra giving very specific directions. But half the time they would actually be rehearsing, they would actually also be like hearing Sun Ra lecture on like particles, on like Egypt, on like the future on space, and this is a man who was interested in space even before like the moon landing. Like he was interested in space as soon as he, learned of it in high school. And so I feel like there's just something really special to find ourselves in these musicians and to feel so much less alone as we take up this arena of the ideological struggle, which music was always meant to. It was never meant to be like just purely a cultural or aesthetic entertainment phenomenon. And that's why I always really appreciate, actually, I wanted to say, like, ever since I came to free school, I always did appreciate whenever we, talk about even like a popular movie. Like I remember what was that movie we talked about like many years ago that was about
Judas and the Black.
Yeah. Well,
That's also
Which one is this?
Judas and the Black
Oh,
Messiah.
he's the producer.
Yeah.
yeah. Whoa.
Wow.
Wait, but I know I already said this kind of, but I can't stop saying about like the musician thing and like the artist thing. Like, but what I wanted to bring up again is like I did understand about like artists being like political and stuff like that, but like it's just like for me, like coming to free school, the reason why I always have to like say this. The reason why I came to free school is because I wouldn't have been able to make any art. Like it's very simple, and like like people didn't think. I had this conversation during free school with Batu last week, and he's like, "You should be able to express or talk to people in an understandable way." But it's like, what if the assumptions that people have are wrong about society? Is making a living worth? Like it's just for me, it's just about where like the heart, like it doesn't make any. I'm not even talking about logic sense. Heart sense. It doesn't make any heart sense for like art to not be honest. And like if we are worried about civilization in any way whatsoever, then wouldn't the maladies of language or science, meaning like how we talk to each other, how we know things, make an effectual difference? Like make a difference. Like wouldn't we want to be in touch with what is known particle, whatever, what in whatever real scale? And whether it be kind or not, so I remember one of the dance, like there was one time that it was like when I was like 17 and I had come in, and first of all, you guys all thought that I knew Derek because like we dressed the same or something. But the third thing was when this guy Thelonious, and he said he was a dancer at Sun Ra.
Oh yeah,
and I was talking to Raju about that, and so he was the first. He was pretty funny though, because he definitely wanted to make me his wife or whatever like that. But
he wanted you to be his wife.
Yeah, or something like that. Because he was like, I'm like Ogun and like you're Maya or whatever. Like that whole thing. But like, what was so I had
Yes, I've heard of that.
why would I have told you? I had gotten very emotional because when I'm listening to Sun Ra, like you said, the music speaks for itself. Like it really kind of tells you stuff. And I was listening to it. There's one time I was listening to it on a side note, and I'm texting Michelle, and I'm like, Sun Ra really breaks whiteness out of you. Like it really just, you know what I'm saying? There's just a way that you can't be white, and he really hates it. But it's like, it affects you in a certain way. But
why do you say that? To explain that
wait
process.
a minute. The reason why I brought it up is because it's kind of having to do like with the feeling and logical, like the brain and like something is working as the music is working. Basically, that's the only thing I can say about that. Anyway, so I got emotional and I to Sunrise House, whatever, because I was like, let me see, because he literally lives down the street from me, and I pass by his house when I go to my friend's house like every day. So I'm mad, in general, that I hadn't, just looked over and seen the Egyptian like iconography on the door, and been like, that's cool. But instead, I found preschool, so like whatever. But the thing, so like I had gone to, well, I was coming from South Philly up to Germantown, and then everything was on time a little bit. It was just a weird day, and I come up to the house, and I was wondering where that tree stump was that had gotten the lightning struck.
Yeah.
But I also incidentally had the flyers, in which I had previously told Kathy, like, I don't know who to give these flyers to, so I only need like 2 flyers. Like, I'm not even like a flyer girl. Like, I don't post stuff around. Like,
You're calling me a
yeah, you play flyer people. So,
we're caught.
but I know that if I'm talking, have a conversation, I'm like, okay, we're having, like, I know you, I see you, So I had a flyer, so I'm like, okay, at least this gives me a reason to explain myself to whomever or whatever. But I don't want to be like weird, like, hey, I'm doing this a nonprofit event. I want to, like, pay for your time, like, blah, blah, blah. I got up to the door. There's, paintings and stuff on the door, which is another conversation too, because he saw the examples, like you said during the meeting yesterday, that the Egypt or Africa is also examples of futuristic vision, examples of discipline, whatever. So like it's kind of deep that it makes a not only just a reference point, but a way of behavior. That's like an example of what he. Anyway, so I get to the door, and I put the flyers in the slot. I'm feeling like someone's coming up to the door, but I'm like just tripping because I'm okay. I wasn't on. I wasn't on any drugs. I promise you. I'm just like a very emotional person. So, but then I'm like, okay, so I was gonna go to the creek afterwards because I didn't really expect a lot. I just needed, and I turn around and the car pulls up, and that was Marshall on or whatever, and his like Danny or whatever. So they had to come back because they were going up to New York, and Marshall forgot his phone, so he thought he left it at the house, and he was trying his phone, and so. I kind of introduced myself a little bit. Not a lot of words happened. It was just a lot of like, I felt like we were talking a lot. Anyway, he seems like a pretty cool guy though. He liked Duke, I thought, because he was looking at the flyer when I had given to him afterwards. He had opened the door and the flyers were there, and I was like, did somebody pick up the flyers in the house? Like, I'm tripping. But he got the flyer, and I was like, I'm crazy, like. Anyway, so I gave him 5, but that was another kind of interaction happening at a certain time, like you're saying earlier, the time and space. That I believe in also. I believe that, when you work and you are disciple of like truth and, like things come into a certain alignment or you're working in that avenue a little bit. But that's why I also think that there's that recognition. I thought there was a recognition. I don't know why I spoke this story at all, but it is an example of like.
I'm glad you told it again because I didn't have it clear when you called me.
I didn't call you at all. I texted you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But it is something to say, like, just to be an honest person. Like, that's the one thing Sunrise would say. He said, I want to make music. If they want to listen, they want to listen. If they're not going to listen, then, and that's not to be like weird. It's just to say, having that pure, like you're saying, that those words Michelle uses sometimes is just really pure or like genuine. Is more important than any performance or any like you're saying minstrelsy for money. Yeah.
Okay, can I say something?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take it.
No, I get this from what you and Kathy are saying, but I also want to reemphasize, like, the way that we have endeavored through this music as free school together, and how I think that qualitatively, like this it changes the composition and the science, and I think that's the commitment of free school. Because like when we first began planning this music, I don't think we were preparing or insisting that we make the conclusions that we're beginning to make today and that we will make next weekend or like begin to make together. I think we just approached this music, we opened our hearts, like Sarafina is saying, and I think we just made one assumption, which is that this is music that is the expression of a revolutionary commitment to humanity. Like we're not saying it is necessarily fused with the blues. We're not saying, you know, I think we really try to strip ourselves of all of the ideological baggage that has been pressed onto this music for a reason, so that people cannot hear it in an organic way. And we attempted to try to restore that organic relationship to this music. And I feel like where we've arrived at now is so staggering, because now we're asking ourselves, are we worthy of this music? And are we worthy of these musicians as inheritors of a revolutionary tradition and as aspiring carriers of a revolutionary tradition? And I think it's staggering because like, that's why I appreciate you bringing it back to Duke as well, because I think like each of them is operating out of such a specific moment. And I see so much of free school and our method or our striving in each of them, where, for example, for Duke to say Black is beautiful, Black beauty, what we have in Harlem is beautiful. Out of the broken promise of Reconstruction, we still see a Jordan. Like, and then Charles Mingus to say like, I'm the artist and I make my stand. Like I put myself with the people and I will shed blood for the people. And I will do whatever it takes to defend my people. To say like I will locate the enemy, I will articulate the enemy, and it is the enemy of white supremacy. And then like each picking up the torch from the other, and then for inheriting the assumptions of him who precedes them. And then Sun Ra taking as an assumption, like they're nothing, like something, we must begin separate from white supremacy itself. Like, yes, the evil of the society is the evil of white supremacy, and hence I begin from a place that is outer of it, so that we can begin humanity, like the American people, from a pure place, like from a non-toxic place. And yeah, it's when like Serafina was speaking, it was funny because I was thinking about how like that striving for a new language, that defense of like the beauty, the dignity, the humanity of the Black proletariat, like not being a coward, being courageous enough to actually name the evil of the society as whiteness. Like those three lines of defense or of discovery, like I see all of it in us, like just like we've inherited Du Bois and King and Baldwin. I think that what's so staggering about the music symposium is we're discovering the meaning of us having inherited the revolutionary thought, but really like the revolutionary spirit and the revolutionary example of these composers.
Well, yeah, I feel like I also have a lot of thoughts, but I wonder if this is maybe a connection that doesn't feel, but I wonder if what Sun Ra was doing is similar also to, like Du Bois had that pageant, the Star of Ethiopia, and he performs like from like Los Angeles, I think. But it's I just been interested in like just looking at historical stuff. But I wonder if Sun Ra is doing something similar to what Du Bois was doing with the Star of Ethiopia. I don't know if that's a really worthwhile thing. But the other thing was I feel like when we're talking about these composers don't just represent themselves, but they represent the collectivity that they were kind of bringing together with like the orchestra, Duke's orchestra. Also, I've been interested in I guess the one composer who we haven't talked as much about with Bootsy, because I was interested in this whole thing of the mothership. Yeah, Bootsy is very active on Facebook actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he like posts videos. So that
Who was
was
that?
Bootsy.
Wait, will you invite him?
Oh,
Try to invite him.
But he posted this. He posted this video one time. He was like, "Okay, I'm gonna explain." He's like, "I'm gonna set the record straight on the mothership." And so he's like, "The mothership is like the P-Funk mothership of Parliament Funkadelic." So this is the mothership is basically Parliament Funkadelic with George Clinton. And so this was literally just like their concept of like what they were as a collective. And then it's like we made this decision.
Yeah.
George Clinton made this decision where we have different ships that go off from the mothership. And so
Yeah.
Bootsy is one of the
The
ships.
rubber band.
His rubber band is one of the ships that goes out from the mothership. You know, but actually it's just very interesting to me because like it's very in line with Sun Ra, very in line with Nation of Islam and free school.
Yeah.
But it gets to this larger thing too of even like what is your imaginary, what is your worldview, your epistemology? Because I think part of what I feel like I've been feeling in this discussion and in general is that this is a time when, yeah, civilization is breaking down. A whole civilization is breaking down, is in a state of collapse. And it's a time that is going to bend and break and try people's sense of the world. Like, this is what I think it makes it so hard to have conversations sometimes, because it's like, yeah, people literally, like, their brains are being tested. Of like, okay, like, do you actually know the world that you're living in? Or are you going to have to start over and try to have a new basically way of understanding the world? And I feel like that's a lot of even like the reaction to Trump and all that stuff. I feel like the reaction is either we're going to basically like the psychological reactions in all ways is essentially trying to find safety again or trying to find reassurance again. And it manifests in multiple ways, one of which is like, oh, like we're going to protest even if we don't know what the protest is about, but we're going to do these protests because it feels familiar and because we did in 2016 and that didn't get us anywhere, but we're still going to do it. Or like I feel like something I've also been feeling, even related to the music stuff, is like there's this like real ideological danger of nostalgia where you look to Black history and even Black musicians, like even someone like Ellington, and all they mean to you is this kind of reassuring nostalgia. Like, oh, like, let's look back to a time in which Black people were cool. And you can also see that in like, the Sinners movie. But I think the other side of it, which is like what you were talking about with like a generation, like maybe two generations which have been cognitively, psychologically, morally manipulated by American society and by the system, is there's this other move which I feel like people make, especially our generation and maybe a generation above us, which is this kind of like recentism, where it's like, oh, because something comes out the most recently, that means it's the most progressive and the most radical. And so you see that a lot with like, the way that people talk about hip hop, or the way people talk about a filmmaker like Ryan Coogler, is like, oh, because it's the most recent thing, that means that we should be behind it. And
it's like a culmination.
Right.
Hip hop is the final inheritor.
Right. And so I actually do think in the film there's this scene that people talk about the most, is like the one where Sammy, the young guy, is kind of summoning the spirits of Africa, but also summoning the spirits of like, hip hop. And so I don't know if you talked. I
didn't catch that.
So like so like it's like in the scene he's playing a song, and then like all of a sudden you see someone who kind of looks like Bootsy Collins come out with like a
all the dancers.
but then also next that shows up is like
there was a
it's like a
person.
DJ,
That's right.
someone
I
doing
did.
DJing, and then like people like twerking and stuff like that, and then they connect it to like Chinese opera dancers, and then African dancers, and all that. So that's the theme that everyone's really hyped up about. Wow, this is like brilliant filmmaking, and like part of it is like when we're watching it, it's like you kind of start to feel a little bit crazy because you're like, wow, all these people like this movie. Like, do we not like this movie? Am I crazy for not liking this movie? Because even last year when like Oppenheimer came out, I actually saw Oppenheimer was an interesting movie. But I feel like this. Okay, I thought I almost subjected.
I was thinking about Oppenheimer when I was looking at
Right. But I don't know. It's just like this movie.
That's funny.
It's like I think the other part of it too is like, the way that people react to it. It's like no one especially our generation, like no one wants to say like, oh yeah, I am brainwashed. Like no one's going to admit like I've been brainwashed or like, oh like I've been manipulated, because everyone wants to be woke and everyone wants to be like, no, I get it. I understand what this is about.
Yeah, right,
And so like there's this whole kind of defensiveness of like, oh like, but also because people are, the culture itself is so barren, especially at the national level. People are so starved of having any positive example of art culture to relate to.
Yeah.
And in the absence of that, it's like, oh, of course we have to defend Kendrick. Of course we have to defend Ryan Coogler, because they're the only people that we have up there on the national stage.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting because, you know, sorry, connecting a lot of things, but like in Blues People, Mary Baraka has this interesting point that part of what made classic blues like Bob Rainey and Bessie Smith, what made them become this national phenomenon is because they couldn't sell them. And that you had this phenomenon of race structures and like people were into black people. And in a way, like I feel like Ryan Coogler kind of embodies like the ruling elite strategy of like, we're going to sell black people because we can make money off of it, but because we know that it sells, it appeals to a certain generation of black people, but also like you have all these white people who come into it and they want to be basically told like, oh, like I'm bad, like, oh, like I am racist, or be told like, yeah, like I am a vampire, like I'm a culture vulture, and like I'm such a bad person, you know, like all that stuff. The people and like, you know, all the white people, they come out of it looking like guilty, but also like enjoying it a lot. And like people want to be told, like, you know, it's kind of a throwback to like also like the 2020 like George Floyd stuff, like that vibe of like diversity. But I guess the last thing I want to end with is that I think what we're doing and what we're saying with, you know, going back to these artists, it's both a defense, but like Serafina said, it's a defense in order to make it offensive against the ideological machine of the ruling class. Like I think that it's always about, we're trying to make an offensive move, and it's not just about trying to protect something or, you know, be defensive in that way, but that like even like I was really struck by, I know that you don't like the Spaces the Place movie,
Oh, I know.
but I like, it's like this movie that Sun Ra is part of, which maybe is probably compromised by certain things, but like the thing that I really liked was two things. One of which was Sun Ra starts off the movie by saying, we are after time. We are operating after time.
Whoa.
And like, I thought that I felt like he was saying something about like, not just like, and it's not, and also like, it's not really, you can't interpret things in this kind of literal way. I feel like that's the point of like art. It's like, you can't interpret everything literally. It's also like what you brought up any recently. It's like, it's hard to, well, it's like yes and no, but even that, you know, like sometimes it's hard to interpret, especially like jazz, because it's not supposed to mean like one thing. Like it is like that is part of the stretching of our own human capacities to try to like come to terms with it, but not in this kind of like dry academic literal way. But like, you know, when he's saying like we're making music which is after time, like I feel like he's
Could you
saying,
explain that?
well, I feel like he's saying like I feel like he's speaking metaphorically about the time of like, I don't know, you could say like Europe, the time of also like, I feel like, but he's also feel like he's talking about like a time after even like the revolution, like the civil rights movement and the revolution. And like, we're trying to find our way after a time which has already expired, but we're trying to find the future. And then the other thing which I really like in the movie is like, he has this, because I was also like, I didn't know that much about Sun Ra, so I was kind of expecting it to be very like woo-woo, very like out there, very abstract. But actually, he has this theme. Like he has this theme where like he goes into this like kind of, I don't even know what it is, but it's kind of like harkening back to like the Black Panther Party. You have all these black youth who are gathered, I think in California. You have all these posters up on the wall of like Malcolm X. King is up there, like the Mary Huey is up there. Other people from the Black Panther Party. And basically, he's like, I kind of interpret that film, part of the film is like, Sun Ra is trying to win over the youth and trying to win over black youth. Where it's like, they're questioning him and it's like, oh, how do we know that you're real? And he's like, I'm not real, but neither are you. Like, this society doesn't see you as real. And so that's why we're creating the myth, like what he calls myth. But it's like, not even like a myth in like literal sense, but it's like, yeah, like what do you do in a society in which like black people are not seen as real?
Yeah.
Like black people are
Yeah.
literally not treated as part of the society. And so like then what kind of new like worldview do you need? Like what kind of people are needed to like, come out of that situation? But I don't know, I just really like that because it's like I'd always kind of seen Sun Ra as like a very like too abstract for me, or like just too out of whatever for me. But like I don't know, I just like the film because like like Sun Ra was dealing with like literally what do we like how do we deal with black poverty? How do we deal with a generation of youth who have been so fucked up by the society, especially in the wake of the counter revolution of against the civil rights movement and all that stuff. And I feel like it's both very philosophical but also very concrete at the same time. And I think that like part of the contribution we're making with putting these composers together is that, going back to what I said about this whole thing of like, oh, like we feel like whatever is the most recent thing is the most revolutionary thing. I think part of the move that we're making is saying like you can't look at progress in so linear. Like just because Bootsy comes at the end doesn't mean that he's the fullest expression of the revolutionary. And in fact, like what we're saying is that all of them fit together, and you can't look at it purely chronologically either. Although chronology does play. But I feel like this is going back to something that Du Bois says in the Sorrow Songs chapter. He's like we don't understand what the meaning of progress is not what Europe has supposed. Like the meaning of progress, basically you have to understand it in a new way. And I feel like this is part of what we're saying. Okay, like these composers, they may be also operating at the same time in different times and different moments, different times and places, but like they're all making a contribution which helps to advance all of the people, all of humanity. And I don't know, I thought that was even like how we're situating them and putting them together. But
Well, I want to add to that and also go back to what Serafina said about Sandra. No, Sandra being like, or him breaking whiteness. Honestly, I've only been looking or trying to understand him for the last 2 or 3 days. So it's breaking my brain a little because I don't feel like I was prepared to encounter somebody like him or to make sense of what he's saying. I think it was always meant to feel outlandish and irrational, but something strange to me. But I really resonate with this thing that Serafina, you were saying about him breaking whiteness in some ways, because I do feel like his entire philosophy and also the music that comes out of it is in fact him almost providing an antidote to whiteness in the society, which he sees as a destructive force for white people also, but he's concerned about what it is doing to black people. Because in several different interviews, or even sometimes he did this lecture series in Berkeley in 71, I think. And that was very deep because there he was talking about how, say that again? No, he was talking about how black people are also losing themselves or losing their history or their consciousness, this historically constituted consciousness, towards this attempt to assimilate or integrate into white society and white standards. And one of the things that I was asking Doc in the morning also is how he's so easy. Like you talk about Sandra, and the first thing people want to say is Afrofuturism. Right. He's the founder, originator of Afrofuturism, and I don't know everything about Afrofuturism, but I agree with what Michelle said. Like it's one of those 3 things that has really been part of that counter-revolutionary move against this music, but not knowing all of the technical or academic details of how that movement is defined, the way I see it is as a retreat from struggle, right?
No,
like to basically wash your hands off any responsibility to do anything, but just lament how bad things have been and say that the best we can do is to have a hypothetical universe in which black people are free. But when you actually go and read or listen to Sandra or listen to his music, you never get the sense that he ever separated himself from black people or from a deep love of black people, because he would say black people are beautiful. They're so similar to the Nation of Islam, almost like an original people. And then, but then he says that the trap is when you try to be white, when you lose all of that, when you lose your own history, and that's also where I guess the mythology comes in. when you lose all that and you try to become white, that is when you become almost less than man, you know. And he even says this, like, this is why the whole Afrofuturism connection with Sandra doesn't really make sense to me, is because he'll even say that a black person can go to Africa, he won't be seen as a black person.
Exactly.
They'll be like, oh, you're a Western, you know. And I don't entirely know, like, he says a lot in like the simple sentences. There's a lot to unpack, and I don't know if I always get all of it. But he's basically saying that there is literally nowhere you can go to escape this. The escape, or the thing starts with you. The thing starts with a change in the mindset or a change in the consciousness. And that's sort of how I also see with mythology about space and so on, almost as a demand for a higher stage of consciousness, a higher stage of human being, like you were saying, to be new men and women. And I do think this thing of him as, or his philosophy as an antidote to whiteness also comes through very like prominently in everything he's talking about. Because like Doc, when you were talking about sinners, and yes, I did have a much more visible reaction to it than you did. You're so chill about it. I was so uncomfortable in the movie theater because everybody was laughing and clapping at jokes that I find obscene and I think are made at the expense of black people and not like, you know. And I agree with what Jeremiah, you were saying, that essentially it is the purpose of that movie is to fabricate a white version of black people and black history and the blues and so on, so that a narrative that's acceptable, that's comfortable for people to deal with. And I like what you said, Doc, about dumbing it down to like its lowest level to talk about some of these things. And it reminded me of something Sandra says, where he says that, you know, this society, all you're trying to do every single day is to basically go to the lowest denominator to explain any phenomenon. And he said that you've done that with God. You brought God down to the lowest. The only role God plays in your life is for judgment when you sin or this and that. You don't think of God's presence in your life as this call to a high aspiration, a high living, high morality. And even the way I think Emily brought this up last time about how he talks about the white version or the white narrative about freedom and peace, on the basis of which you're going out and fighting all these wars. He says that that kind of freedom and peace will only come to you when you die, because essentially the freedom and peace you're talking about is freedom from any responsibility, complete like serenity, comfort, no conflict ever. That will only come to you with death. And yeah, and then the other thing is like all of that, the white tendency to reach for a certain safety. You never want to put yourself at risk. I think that's also how I see what he says about the unknown, where he's like, it's, you know, that, right, like
Impossible.
yeah. So you're so dying to find some kind of safety and security so that you can wake up every morning and know exactly everything that's going to happen and so on. You can control everything, but your salvation actually lies in what you don't know, what you don't understand. And I think that's where all of this like comes from. And all of this, I think, is posed and is given to the people of America, but also the world, as a way to correct yourself before it's too late. Because otherwise, and you know, in that film he made, Space is the Place, at the end, like, you know, he takes black people and they go away, but then the earth implodes. You know, so there's also that prophecy, is that without a correction, you're going to implode. This is not going to go on like this forever. There's an end date to this civilization and this way of living.
I just say something this after time. After time is a very evocative concept. It's pregnant with a lot of interpretations, you know. Is death after time? And if death is after time, is it just another existence in time? I mean, I think, but that if you think about it, that's Sun Ra, that's quintessentially Sun Ra. And he has this song called Altered States. And So I think the time question is a big question. We might not have time. We'll have to do it at the symposium. But time is so fundamental, and it is avoided in most theologies, most philosophy, and now theoretical physics doesn't know how to deal with it. But yeah, I think this is something we should explore.
Because I feel like another thing in the Place documentary is like he talks a lot about this idea of an altered destiny.
Altered destiny, yes.
And I feel like this thing
So
of
this
like,
is-
yeah, like destiny or something like foretold or something basically is meant to happen. And I feel like, yeah, like Sun Ra is like a prophet, or even this thing of like, yeah, like can you be outside of time or after time?
Yeah.
Or like, is there a teleology that leads somewhere? And then what causes that? Like, is it just like the forces of time or like science and space, or is it like something human, which is also then like unknown or uncertain? And I think, yeah, like I was also really impressed by Sun Ra, and then also I think the great distance between how successfully he's basically portrayed and distorted as like, yeah, like kind of woo-woo or like separated from politics or ideology or the real world, where I feel like he does basically get lumped in with Afrofuturism and thus like this escapist like philosophy of like, oh, there's nothing in this world worth saving, like we should just quit. But I feel like Sun Ra, like the thing that makes him concrete, I feel like, is the way that the life world of like Black people or like the creative, the imaginary is made really like real. And I think in some ways it almost kind of makes sense to me that he, like at least this is the place, like some of it is alongside and then after like the civil rights movement, where the life world is not something that you escape into as a fantasy, but actually the life world is a resource. Like it's a shared resource of like Black people. And like through that, that's what keeps people human, like rehumanizes and like heals as a resource to then actually struggle like in this world. And I feel like some of that, like the way that that works reminds me also of, yeah, like the principles of nonviolence and the Third American Revolution, where it is basically like a struggle of reality, like the white worldview, which sees Black people as not real. And then Black people who are like, no, we are real. We have a life world. We have a vision. We have a sense of humanity. And actually this like life world is the one that has to prevail, not just like the struggle between Black and white, but actually like as a vision for American society. And I feel like it's also related to this thing of like the musicians and the composers not just being individuals who stand by themselves, but are somehow connected. Like throughout time, like throughout place, they're connected. And that's because they're part of like Black people. Like, and then I was thinking about how in our study of like the Black social system with Van Damme, it's this idea that the unit of analysis can't be the individual human being. It's actually the community. And I feel like it shows, yeah, I think the way that like this connection is not like linear time or like just like, oh, these people were in physical proximity to each other, but it's that there is this shared like life world or like human resource. And I don't know, I was even interested in like, we were talking a lot about, I think, the Harlem Renaissance over the last year. And I feel like in some ways it's interesting to me as like a beginning of basically like that modern impulse of like many different people converging, like struggling and almost like create, like, I don't know, because I think it's like in Ellington, like Ellington talks a lot about Harlem. And I feel like he consistently is saying like, this is a place where there are more churches than there are cabarets. And I feel like this reference point is like really interesting, where out of Harlem, like there came all these musicians, but they're also poets, they're artists. And yeah, I don't know.
I feel like, because the film, or I think Sinners too, it kind of draws from some of the contradictory parts of these people in the movie, like kind of positioning the juke joint against the church.
Yes.
You know, where the juke joint, the kind of after hours place where Black people go to party, that's what freedom is. Because the film is also trying to explain what is freedom for Black people. And freedom is to be found when Black people can have fun, you know, under the auspices, or away from white people.
Yeah, that's right.
And it doesn't see the church as the origination of the actual quest for freedom for Black people. And and I feel like the other
There's
But
no
yeah.
movement, there's no spirit, there's no joy, there's no nothing in the church. They're just sitting in the church, and everybody's properly dressed in white. But the juke joint is where they can be free with it. Yeah.
Wait, can I say something? Well, back to this thing on Afrofuturism. I think that it's so hard to actually, you have to make a deliberate choice to separate Sun Ra from Afrofuturism to even begin to look at Sun Ra. Because I feel like what almost all, if not all of us said, like about Sun Ra today is that like, even without having directly looked at Sun Ra, we had absorbed so much of this misassumption about Sun Ra. And I don't think it's just that, I think it's more than him being involved with Afrofuturism. I think he's seen as one of like the musical origins of Afrofuturism, where the first category that you can identify him as is as like an Afrofuturist. And the reason I place it among like Afro-pessimism and Afrocentrism, which I think in some ways we've made more full-bodied like attacks of before, like making this point about Afrofuturism was important as we were talking and planning with each other, because I actually think it might be the most violent, like out of those three ideologies, where you're assassinating the possibility of a future, like a people who have always needed to be futuristic because they were not allowed to be free in a society that like rejected their humanity. And yeah, I just think it's really important that we go hard on this point against Afrofuturism.
I mean, you were saying the term itself was coined by like a white academic,
Yeah.
and I looked into it, and like the first book was the Afrofuturism thing was coined in 1993, which is the year that Sun Ra died, which is very ironic.
Yeah, by a white critic. Like the whole thing to me that I think will also really support this is just these are musicians with and revolutionaries that really just to be distorted, and the use of the word Afrofuture is very clearly an attempt to use very different words that they would have used to like so misrepresent them that it is. I know the one thing I was going to say was just that I also had to, I think my own journey through the music symposium, the planning has also been to relinquish so much of what I feel like have been all these myths that shroud these figures. And then the Afrofuturist one around Sun Ra is somehow like so propagated. It's like so hard to separate Sun Ra from it, that it is actually something that we do need to take apart. Because I think that in my understanding, and I feel like being like part of like the university, and I also think that all of these are connected to postmodernism. So I do think that'll have to be a really important part of like understanding the moment that the counter-revolution brings about an ideology and a philosophy that rejects modernity and rejects, I think, all that the vision for a future, like that was so like, you know, out of so much struggle waged and like crafted and like actually, developed by all these musicians. It all had to be like sunk underground under this myth of either a future that is like science fiction or hypothetical. But every time Sun Ra was talking, he was talking about like reality, and he was talking about science, not science fiction, like science. And he was talking about white supremacy, I think, is what we've also been establishing today. Like, could that other planet actually be a world free of white supremacy if we were to struggle for it? And so, like, I think the way that we were talking about it last night is like futurism is part of all of these attempts with like postmodernism to reduce, to really, really, really narrow someone like Sun Ra, but also even Bootsy Collins, the funk, because of that focus also on like the mothership, as you're saying, into like a gimmick or into like an aesthetic or cultural phenomenon with no political implications. And it can be a site of all this like speculation and academic musings, and like you can so easily as an academic be, or even as an artist, like I know we talked about More Mother 2 years ago, and like also like trying to weave in discussions
Yeah,
about like
similar
Black
idea.
people and science and time with never or quantum futures, whatever, without actually taking into account like there is a struggle and there is a new time to struggle for but instead retreat is like retreat into our like safe.
No, well, I just want to complete a thought which I was thinking about earlier, which is that in a time when Western civilization is collapsing, it's like the people who are best equipped to see a way forward and to not be kind of buffeted around and thrown around by all these different currents of like whatever's happening politically, like historically, like is people who have, yeah, like we say, like a different worldview, a different epistemology. And like you can see it very directly. It's like even like a group like the Nation of Islam, like they're because they have like an actual different sense of the world, like a different cosmology, all that stuff, like even like a different God, like all that stuff that allows you to not be so manipulated and controlled and basically like also so pessimistic in a time when like the civilization is in collapse, and to also see where is the future. And like that is really the seed that makes it possible for like that for people to find a way towards the future. And this is like this is so what I mean you brought like what can Black music do for the American people for this time? It's to give them like a different sense of reality, like a different sense of the world, which is necessary in a time when like all of the assumptions of civilization are being tested and are being put under question. So I just want to.
Should we do avant-garde?
Oh, yeah.
What the fuck?
Okay, so I guess we'll keep it brief, but so we're planning for the 4th issue of Avant-Garde, which we're hoping to publish and print and online in time for the second knowledge conference, which is coming. And so we're dedicating it to Muhammad Ali, who his death anniversary is in early June. And so we have like kind of the current tentative list of topics and articles that people are working on, which may be subject to change, but this is what we have so far. So we want to have something published in the issue around Du Bois and the world movement of self. This is such a central concept for free school right now. And then on the topic of Nation of Islam, Jahan, Meghna, and Neha and Doc are doing an interview with Minister Ishmael Mohammed in Chicago. Hopefully that'll be happening soon. Alice is writing an article about China and America and modernity, basically, and like industrial modernity, but then also spiritual and cultural modernity in this question, which brings together in many ways. So Eddie is writing an article about manhood and I don't know, yeah, I guess like other questions, yeah, like the crisis of young men, the crisis of men in general, how this is tied to the crisis of white civilization, all that stuff. Blaze is writing about John Brown and the spirit of John Brown and this question of whiteness. And also a question, I feel like a lot of us are talking about civilization, basically. And then I think Michelle and Serafina made an article that is about kind of a companion piece, like you said, to the music symposium, looking more deeply into the lives of the artists, the 4 composers that we're looking at. And then Serafina, I think you already have a painting of Muhammad Ali, but I guess you may do another one potentially. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're working on so far. We have these different, speaking of collective endeavors, we have different pods and different ways of trying to work together. Yeah.
And then we'll try to publish it or print it at the science conference. Yes, and you don't.
I've also
Drink commerce. What comments have we not spoken about? Should we do comments? We've done that. We've done that. Did we? Yeah. What in a new way? By responding
She's saying
in live time. Oh yeah, you're right. We did do that.
Do we have any feedback about the 3rd edition, the one on Baldwin?
Oh.
We've gotten, well, maybe Alice, you could talk about, Even you talked with Mercer.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Wait, say it again.
Well, we didn't get much. I will see him tomorrow, so I will bring feedback. Essentially, I think what is helpful is that for avant-garde is being distributed through the city of Philadelphia. Through the city of Philadelphia, where it's, those who have come to our previous conferences, but then also through the different reading groups, for example, through the Year of Baldwin, and then the various institutions that we also partner with, such as the October Gallery, what else?
Leo's
Yeah,
concerts.
Leo's concert, and so forth. And so it really is us trying to consolidate the ideas of preschool and share it with the city of Philadelphia. But more to come on what Mercer, but including Mercer, the October Gallery itself has classes throughout the year, and so Mercer had purchased a couple of avant-gardes to be distributed at these classes, and then last time we communicated, it shared that he had wanted more.
To see everyone back here for the music symposium in the week.
Did you want to do chat or we could end? Okay, then we're to make up for last free school when we ended 40 minutes late. We're gonna end 20 minutes early. We're gonna end 20 minutes early today.
Balancing an equation, I think.
So thanks for all of our commenters and another great preschool, and we look forward to live streaming the event next weekend and seeing you next weekend at our first music symposium.
What, you should say what time we're gonna start.
Okay.
The doors open at 9:30. Okay, so we're doing this thing where and then the event starts at 10, but we're gonna put the word out there that the doors open at 9:30. So be there, be square on Saturday, May 10th, and then that will go with the lunch break at 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the second day, May 11th, would be 1 to 6 p.m.
We just didn't.
Yeah, and the doors open on the second day at 12:30.
Okay. So we'll see everyone next week.
Bye.
Bye.